This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now. Welcome to America Daily. I'm Mark Jackson. In July, Boris Johnson became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The 55-year-old Conservative politician is a vocal supporter of the Brexit plan to get the UK out of the European Union. He has also been likened to President Donald Trump. People either love him or hate him. So who exactly is Boris Johnson? Here to tell us more is Tabitha Smiles.
Who is Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and how does this affect the US-UK relations? In a BBC documentary called The Boy Who Wanted to Be King, Lord Hennessy, who is a political historian, had this to say about Boris Johnson.
Would you like to be Prime Minister?
I think it's a very tough job being Prime Minister. Very tough job. I mean, obviously, if the ball came loose from the back of a scrum, which it won't,
Might.
or of course it'd be a great thing to have a crack at, but it's not going to happen.
The human bulldozer who snatched the ball from the back of the Tory scrum is a man of many contradictions. A classical scholar turned popular entertainer, a self-proclaimed liberal one-nation Tory, hand in glove with the hardline Brexiteers.
There's a spectrum of opinion about him. One is that he will be the most unsafe pair of hands ever to open a prime ministerial red box. And at the other end, people think here is a man of brilliance and flair who can suddenly, like an alchemist, turn the base metal of Brexit to something shiny and remarkable.
So who is Boris Johnson? Alexander Boris De Pfeffel Johnson is his full name, and he grew up as the eldest of 4 children. According to his friends and family, Boris grew up believing that life was one big competition and he wanted to come out on top. In fact, as a young boy, he was asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he answered, "I want to be the king." The son of a diplomat, Boris was actually born in New York City. Later, when the family returned to Britain, Boris attended many elite institutions. He went to the same all-boys school that Prince William and Prince Harry attended. He also attended Oxford, alongside fellow Prime Minister David Cameron. He even became the president of the Student Union. After college, he became a professional journalist and was hired by The Times. He ended up getting fired from that post due to fraudulently making up a quote in an article. He then got another job at the Daily Telegraph, and he became the Brussels correspondent. It was here that he set about writing articles ridiculing the European Commission. And though his fellow journalists felt that he was a bit over top, he actually started to make a name for himself. Similar to Donald Trump, he began appearing on celebrity TV and soon became a familiar face and a household name. Boris Johnson is known for being rather unconventional, and that along with his charm, it has helped him to be able to cross the party line. This was never more evident in the fact that Boris Johnson held 2 terms as the mayor of London. He later returned to Parliament in 2015, and he became the face of the Leave campaign. After an unsuccessful run for number 10 Downing Street, he was asked by the newly elected Prime Minister, Theresa May, to be her foreign secretary, and in that case, he became Britain's top diplomat. During his 2 years as the foreign secretary, he ended up offending a lot of people. Boris is a man of force as well as faults. In the BBC documentary, an old classmate of his had this to say about Boris.
He is a man with human frailties, as many are, and I would always say, should our politicians all be, perfect, puritanical, immaculate lives led, perhaps, then we wouldn't be representing the society that we live in.
It's very interesting to note that before Boris Johnson became the prime minister, he appeared in a documentary where he was filmed as he traced back his family roots. And when he was young, he was raised by his granny Butter and was told many stories that he had a famous ancestor. So during the documentary, he eventually traces his lineage all the way to King George II of England, and is also told that through different marriages, he's discovered that he's actually connected to all the royal families or royal houses of Europe, including the Romanovs. So now Boris Johnson is on to Brexit in history. And very much like our own President Trump, Boris Johnson has now become, unfortunately, the most loved and hated man in his country. It does sound a bit familiar. Here's what Washington Times opinion editor Charles Hurt said on Fox about the comparison with Trump and Johnson's plans for Brexit.
It's so interesting to look back at the Boris Johnson path. He was the mayor of London, as we pointed out. Then, after he led the Brexit movement, he sort of got pushed aside. Theresa May took over. She wasn't a big fan of the whole idea. But then she made him foreign secretary. But then he bolted because he didn't like the way things were going with how she was trying to pull it off.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of the key to why Boris Johnson and Donald Trump get along very well, is because they're just so totally, unconventional. They're willing to sort of take on campaigns that other regular politicians would never dream of touching. And of course, Brexit, all the experts, much like Donald Trump's election, Brexit, all the professionals in England said that this was not going to happen. It was not something anybody needed to worry about, and we remember all of the people in the United States saying the same thing about Donald Trump. And these guys, they're both guys that really, they like to be discounted, and they like to have people say that they don't have a shot at something, and then they love proving everybody wrong, especially the experts.
Well, he's going to have an uphill battle, and as David rightly pointed out, he will go to form a government. He'll go to Buckingham Palace and meet with the Queen to do that. She's been down that road many, many times. But, as she watches all of this unfold, and the rest of Great Britain does as well, they have a very similar dynamic going on there that we do here. They've got a very hard left that gets a lot of attention, Jeremy Corbyn, and then they've got Boris Johnson on the other end of the spectrum. Which way they're going to end up going, I think, will be very informative to all of us around the world.
Oh, I think without a doubt. But I do think that, it's important to remember that, Brexit did happen. The vote did happen, and it has survived a lot of efforts by people, the establishment, to undermine it. But, these are the people who stood up against Adolf Hitler all alone. They're the people that, and obviously the United States came in and helped defeat Hitler. But for a period there, they were the only people standing up for what they believed in. And when I think about that, I think that it does not surprise me that there might be sort of a silent majority there that really does yearn to have their independence back. They're proud people. They have good reason for being proud people. And so I think that all of the experts who are yet again, and I agree. I mean, it seems like an insurmountable task that he's got between now and October 31st. But I don't put it past him.
It seemed like nobody liked the mushy middle ground,
Right.
and that, he's going to push for the hard Brexit, to be sure. And whether or not those numbers have grown in this stretch of time will be interesting to watch, I think, for Americans as well.
So let's talk about the Brexit issue and Britain today. How did Boris Johnson win the Prime Minister seat this time? He received a 2/3 vote in the Conservative Party to win the seat and was tasked to get the Brexit deal done. When did the UK join the EU? The United Kingdom made its first application to join the European Union in 1961. It quickly appeared that there would be a danger of political isolation within Western Europe. The Commonwealth states were rushing to do deals with the new bloc, and it had an American support as well. This application was then vetoed by the French government in 1963, and with a second application, it was also vetoed by the French in 1967. It was only in 1969 that there was a green light to give negotiations for British membership. The United Kingdom joined the European Economic Community, as it was then, on January 1st of 1973, with Denmark and Ireland. This proved controversial at the time. The Labour Party initially sought renegotiation of membership. This was toned down to require a referendum on whether the UK should remain part of the community. This referendum was duly held in 1975 with a 67% vote in favor of continued membership. So then the big question is, why do the British people want to leave the EU now? A couple main points brought out are the fact that MPs and elected government officials are finding that they have less and less power in their own country to make changes, especially changes that their constituents are asking for. They have to have EU approval before they can do any of those things. This is severely affecting the will of the people and their freedom to vote on their own country's issues and solutions. Second point brought out is that a major concern is the growing cost of being in the EU, and it has been mounting every single year. And as of 2018, it was $10 billion for the UK. Open borders is also a highly contended issue. Any member of the EU can travel to any EU country without needing a visa or permission to stay there. Also, there's an issue with migration, when the EU is stating we'll take all these immigrants, but not actually aligning where they will go. It basically is taxing the systems of the countries that these immigrants are going to. So the country has no ability to say, hey, we don't have the resources to take care of this many people. So 2 ways for Brexit to go are either a soft or hard exit strategy. Here's a quick breakdown on what that means from a website called, and I'll link this on our website as well, it's called The UK and a Changing Europe. So what is a soft Brexit? Brexit can take many forms. Different forms could be soft or hard. When people talk about soft Brexit, they're referring to a scenario where the UK stays either within the EU single market by becoming a member of the European Economic Area like Norway, or in the European Customs Union, or both. So I guess there are other, groups they can be in besides the EU. If this happens, the short-term economic impact of leaving the EU would likely be small. However, if it remained in the single market, the UK would have to maintain free movement of EU citizens. It would remain subject to judgments of the European Court of Justice, and it would have to contribute to the EU budget. If the UK remained in the customs union, it would be unable to strike its own trade deals with other countries. It would benefit from all trade deals signed by the EU. However, those EU deals signed after Brexit would be negotiated without any UK input. So it sounds like it's a pretty hard position to be in. So then what is a hard Brexit? The UK would not only leave the EU, but also the EU single market, of which non-EU countries are also members, and the EU Customs Union, of which non-EU countries are also members. The UK would instead aim to secure a free trade deal with the EU, ideally covering both goods and services. In a hard Brexit situation, the UK would not have to sign up for free movement of EU nationals or be subject to the European Court of Justice. It would probably not have to contribute to the EU budget either. It would also be able to sign free trade deals with other countries. However, the UK is likely to be able to sign a free trade deal with the EU or other countries before it leaves the EU in 2019. Negotiating trade deals usually takes many years. Here's a short BBC News clip that ran in the UK in the year 2015, right before the 2016 referendum vote was done. You can see that these issues are laid out by Susan Evans, who's a UK IP.
I'm Suzanne Evans, Deputy Chairman of UKIP, and I think we should leave the European Union. Why? Well, of the 51 countries in Europe, only 28 are members. We don't need to be in this club. Border control matters too, because citizenship of one EU member state gives a free pass to the rest. The horrific and inhumane consequences of this can be seen day in, day out on our TV screens at the moment, as migrants risk life and limb to reach our shores. But the number one reason I want to leave is because the EU undermines British democracy. They have the power to tell us what to do in our own country, and right now there's not a lot you or I can do to stop them. There's not much the people in here can do about it either. If you think our MPs run the country, think again. This might be the home of our national parliament, but it doesn't mean MPs make all the laws. Let's go and talk to UKIP MP Douglas Carswell. Douglas, why can't MPs such as yourself make all the laws that affect Britain?
Slowly but surely, MPs here in the House of Commons and ministers in Whitehall have given our powers away. That's one of the reasons why people feel this incredible sense of frustration with the political process, because you elect people who promise to sort things out, but actually on many, many issues, they're powerless. Take, for example, bank reform, something that matters enormously to people who saw those huge bailouts. They want something done about it. I've tried to trigger debates here in the House of Commons. I've tried to make sure that my constituents' real sense of anger against that sense of entitlement that the bankers have is dealt with. No can do. It's up to Brussels.
Brussels has a huge say over laws in Britain on issues like business and employment, energy, trade, farming, fishing. And what's best for Britain simply isn't prioritised. Right, let's talk cold hard cash. The second reason I want to leave the European Union. It costs us £10 billion a year in membership fees alone, about the same as we spend on GP services for the entire country in a year. And then of course there's the indirect cost of meeting regulations and directives set by Brussels, and the impact of policies such as the free movement of people. While Britain remains in the European Union, we're obliged to let any EU citizen that wants to come here, come. And if we can't control how many migrants we get coming into the country, how can we plan for and how can we relieve pressure on public services such as our GP surgeries, our hospitals and our schools? I also think it's disturbingly unfair.
Similarly, a video also came out opposing the Brexit deal, and it was put out by the opposing party, so we saw how the vote went. So here are the Brexit facts. The majority of people from the UK and Wales voted to leave in the UK referendum in 2016. 62% of voters in Scotland voted to stay in the European Union, which is why they're so angry right now, because they actually want to stay there. Now, when you look at Ireland, things are more complicated. So examining data from the 2016 Northern Ireland Assembly election, it emerges that there was a very strong ethno-national basis to the voting. It seems that 85% of Catholics voted to remain, compared to only 40% of Protestants. The difference is even starker when one considers how the respondents describe their own ideological position and identity. Of those who identified as nationalists, 88% voted to remain in the Union, compared to only 34% of those who described themselves as unionists. And 87% of Irish respondents voted Remain, compared to only 37% of British respondents. That said, voting was not only ethno-national, both Protestant and Catholics were split. Yeah, Ireland is just so many different conflicting things there. So due to the claims that Boris was not elected by the people, but was brought in by the Conservative Party to get the Brexit deal done, which the majority of the UK did vote for in 2016, a question has come up about whether there will be another general election and if a second referendum vote is going to happen in the UK. So this is a complicated issue, with many thinking that since it's been 3 years since the vote for Brexit, people want to see potentially a second vote to see where people stand today. And the general election is to see if the UK people actually want Boris Johnson to be their prime minister. Here are two British experts on Al Jazeera discussing this topic.
There's two other scenarios I want to explore, aside from the idea of Brexit or no-deal Brexit, and that is a general election or a second referendum on Brexit, because both have been touted by various players. Let's start with Alan. The idea of a general election at some point, as all three of you have made the point, Boris Johnson has not been elected by the people. He's been appointed by the Conservative Party, and he got 2/3 of the vote in that ballot. Is there a prospect of a general election here, and how do you think the electorate, the people, will respond?
It looks more and more likely there'll be a general election for the basic reason that Boris Johnson will hit the buffers, either intentionally or otherwise, of the parliamentary arithmetic, which is against his Brexit strategy. And that will force him into an election. So he'll either do that beforehand, before he's forced, or he will think that actually it's quite good to be forced into it. So he can say, it's the parliament versus the people. I'm going to get a mandate for no deal for the Brexit that you voted for 3 years ago, and the parliament is stopping me. And that he hopes that's the sort of strategy that will win him that 33% of the vote that Jonathan was talking about. I mean, the signs are so far that he's had this sort of brief bounce in support, and he has managed to successfully align the Brexit supporters to the point where a poll just an hour ago put the Brexit Party down on 9% when they were polling double that a couple of weeks ago. So it's entirely possible we get to an election with the Remain parties fractured between the Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party, and the Conservative Party managing to align with a third of the vote in our electoral system, winning a majority of seats in the House of Commons. That's not impossible from here.
Yeah, I think, Alan, actually, a general election could be really interesting, because all the talk is about how Boris Johnson wasn't elected by the people. But there is, I mean, he was a popular mayor of London. There's always been talk about him becoming the leader of the party or the prime minister. And if it actually goes out to the people and he does get a lot of support, well, then that silences them all. He can say, right, I was right all along. You did want me.
Yeah, he can go and seek that mandate for his negotiating strategy. He can probably be quite. He won't need it to necessarily say I'm pursuing a no deal. He can say give a message to the European Union that we don't want the current deal. We want something different, and if not, we'll go for a no deal. So he can blur that a bit as well. It's entirely possible that his strategy could pay off. There's a whole load of risks. He could lose a whole load of seats to the Remain parties in more Remainer part of the country that the Conservative Party currently hold. The seats in Scotland are going to go. It's a risky strategy, but it could be the only route for him from here.
Jonathan Liss, is there the prospect of a second Brexit referendum, possibly?
I would say that a general election is a 100% certainty, and a second referendum is very likely, because there is no way out of this. A no deal but now a deal has basically become impossible. We're looking at either a no deal, which would be calamitous by the government's own admission, really, or no Brexit at all. And in those circumstances, there'd be extraordinary pressure to have that second referendum, because the fundamental point is that there is no mandate for no deal. And the Brexiters have to admit that themselves. There's a certain amount of revisionism going on at the moment, where Brexiters are saying, oh no, we did talk up the possibility of no deal before, but that simply doesn't bear up to any scrutiny.
Wow, so either way, Boris Johnson has a huge and difficult job ahead of him, but most believe that he is the right man for the job. One main question that we have on the other side of the pond is, how will America and our two countries work together after he is officially getting through Brexit? Many in the UK and the US are actually excited about Boris Johnson. They feel he will be able to work well with President Trump. Here's actually a short clip from Niles Gardner, who's from the Heritage Foundation, speaking to Fox about how he sees the relationship with Boris Johnson in office and with America.
As Johnson takes over from Theresa May, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are also hoping for a recharge in U.S.-UK relations, and just wait until the two men get together. Niall Gardner joins us, director of the Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. So, Niall, what do you expect from Boris Johnson?
Well, I expect great things, actually. It's been a tremendous start, I think, for Boris Johnson this week here in London. He has had a tremendous beginning as the new British Prime Minister, replacing Theresa May, whose tenure was extremely disappointing, it has to be said. Boris Johnson is a visionary, big-picture Prime Minister. He has pledged to deliver Brexit on October the 31st, and he has also promised to restore the strength and power of the Anglo-American special relationship, which was weakened under Theresa May. And I expect that Boris Johnson is going to have a very good relationship with Donald Trump. They spoke on the phone last night, according to Downing Street, a very positive discussion. And I think that Britain has an extremely bright future in the Brexit era as a sovereign, truly independent nation. And Brexit will be great for Britain. It'll be great for the United States as well. Tremendous opportunities on both sides of the Atlantic.
Why is that?
Well, firstly, I think that we're going to see, certainly once Brexit is implemented, a large-scale US-UK free trade agreement between the world's largest and fifth largest economies. As President Trump says, Britain will be at the front of the line for a trade deal. Famously, of course, Barack Obama warned that Britain would be at the back of the queue for a trade agreement if the British people dared vote for Brexit. Well, the British people did vote for Brexit, and now Britain is at the front of the queue for a free trade deal. And you have a US president in place who is a very strong Brexit supporter, who believes that Brexit will be great for the US economy as well. It's going to help create jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. It's going to significantly increase trade and investment between the US and the UK. But also, Brexit will be a great force for free trade, for free enterprise, for innovation across the world. And I think that Britain will be a far stronger and more powerful force on the world stage in the Brexit era, freed from the shackles of the European Union. After all, the EU is a sinking Titanic, as an economic basket case in many respects. And a truly free sovereign Britain, I think, will be a magnificent force for freedom across the world. And I think the United States will be standing shoulder to shoulder with the British people in the Brexit era. And that's a tremendous thing.
And tell me a bit about Boris Johnson himself. When he was London mayor, he was critical of then candidate Trump. But there have been comparisons between the two. The president himself said that he's the British Trump, and he's quite a fascinating character. I mean, he's eccentric. When it comes to English, that's especially eccentric. Born in New York City on the Upper East Side, lived in Washington, lived in Connecticut. Quite a character.
He certainly is. And as you mentioned, Boris Johnson was born in the United States. He was until very recently actually a US citizen. He's very pro-American. He's a big believer in the special relationship. Also, Boris Johnson is a huge admirer of Margaret Thatcher and Winston Churchill. He models himself in many respects on Churchill. He wrote a best-selling book on Winston Churchill. He's also, in many ways, an unconventional politician. He is somebody who has broken the political mold many times. He was mayor of London twice, in a city that traditionally votes for the left-wing Labour Party. He is a staunch conservative who believes in the idea of British greatness. And I think that Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, I think, will strike a very strong, effective relationship on the world stage. They're going to stand up together to the European Union. They are both a breath of fresh air, I think, on the international stage at this time. They are challenging conventional wisdom on both sides of the Atlantic, and they are both great believers in the principles of liberty and freedom, of free enterprise, sovereignty, self-determination. So a lot in common between Boris Johnson and President Trump. And I expect you're going to see the British lion roaring on the world stage with Johnson as Prime Minister, and an even greater Britain with Brexit, which is all about, at the end of the day, the ideals of sovereignty, freedom and liberty, the same principles that the American people hold so dear in their own hearts.
So we will keep watching the Brexit deal unfold and hoping for good things for the United Kingdom as they go through this difficult stage in their country. We hope and wish them the best as usual. This is Tabitha Smiles for America Daily. Thanks for listening and hope to see you next time.
This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.